At DDI, we turn data-driven insights into dynamic leadership development, unlocking potential, sparking growth, driving performance, because better leaders create a better future.
Hello and welcome to our webinar, HR Reality Check. You forecast revenue, why not talent? Presented by Jasmine Boatman, SVP of DDI's North American and Europe operations, and April King, Manager of DDI's Adjunct Services. Welcome in, Jasmine and April. We are excited to have your expertise on this topic today.
Thank you so much, Kim, and welcome all. We're really glad to be with you all here today. This is part 3 in a series where in the first 2 webinars, we spent time talking about why leaders need assessment. We talked about why assessments fail. And if you weren't able to join us, I can tell you that there was a general consensus and agreement that we do need assessments. We do need objective data to make better decisions about the leaders of our future. But what we want to talk about today is really going beyond the theoretical and the idealistic, and to take a moment and really get honest about why, despite the fact that we know we need assessment, the majority of organizations still don't use them as effectively or as often or as consistently as they need to. And why do we, as people professionals, often feel like we're in the position of convincing others to do what's good for the business, even though it's something that they themselves say they need to do. So to illustrate this point, I want to show you some research that DDI has conducted. We've been conducting some of the most extensive and long-standing leadership studies for decades. And we recently released our 2025 Global Leadership Forecast, examining the evolving dynamics of leadership practices and their business impact across multiple industries and economies. And this year's study drew insights from over 10,000 leaders and over 2,000 organizations worldwide. 233 CEOs revealed that their top concerns keeping them up at night are attracting and retaining talent, slowing economic growth and navigating uncertainty, and developing the next generation of leaders. I don't know about you, but to me, this makes sense in this moment and for today's conversation, because economic uncertainty creates this need to be prepared for anything. But it also creates this really interesting paradox when you're balancing cost consciousness and cost cutting, while also figuring out how to invest in your most valuable assets. So as you look at this, you might be checking your own reality right now and saying to yourself, that's not how our organization spends its money or its time. And unfortunately, you're not alone. I think, to be honest, it's not an uncommon phenomenon outside of work. So an example I think of that comes to my mind is how many of us are trying to be healthier. We know the salad's good for us. We know we need to be developing the next generation of leaders to navigate this uncertainty in front of us, but it's not always the decision we make. And not with bad intentions, but for other really real reasons. In my role as both a scientist, I'm an IO psychologist, and a very, very long time ago, I led DDI's Center for Analytics that conducts the research on this screen. I share that to tell you that I believe deeply in the science of what we do. And not to go all hair club for men, for those of you that understand that reference, I am also a customer of our practices, a practitioner. I've spent the past few years navigating my own part of this organization through the gravity of those past 5 years and all of the ups and downs and turnarounds that has entailed. Now, I've had the privilege of doing this alongside talking to so many of our customers who are going through the exact same thing. So while I have an educated perspective and an inherent belief in the science, at the end of the day, I too have had to be realistic about prioritizing my team's time and what gets results. And especially during COVID, and even more recently, I would have loved the luxury of investing in people in so many more ways. But I have to admit that I too was forced to delay people initiatives and make decisions that I didn't want to due to budget and economic conditions and just the reality of what needed to be done. So given all that, I thought this data was prime fodder for our time today, because the reality is that slowing growth and uncertainty in the markets, if you've been watching the news and all the earnings reports over the past few weeks, is pushing most organizations to reduce costs. And at a time when the right talent is critical for moving from surviving to thriving. But the reality, here's the reality check part, is that ensuring strategic continuity during periods of financial pressure is the singular focus for most business leaders in times like this. But the good news is that's where you all come in. So an area that we've been reporting on since 2018 is around the evolving role that HR needs to play within organizations. We looked at it in terms of the three roles here defined on the screen. Partners, who are HR teams that collaborate with business leaders, but mainly execute on established strategies, compared to reactors, which are HR teams that primarily respond to immediate needs, can focus on administrative tasks, versus anticipators, which are HR teams that proactively forecast future needs. They drive strategic talent decisions that are aligned with business goals. And what our research shows is that prior to the global pandemic, many HR organizations were playing more anticipator roles, meaning they were able to use data and analytics to predict talent gaps. They were planning for future talent needs in their organization and working to help mitigate those gaps. We also saw a large percent of HR organizations being able to play a strong partner role where they collaborated with the business to work through challenges. But we saw a backslide at the percentage of HR organizations that played anticipator or partner roles in their companies once the pandemic hit. I think instead, HR found themselves playing more of a reactor role. They were responding to immediate needs when asked, and of course, for very good reason. In our most recent results, you can see that the role of HR in many cases seems to be stuck in this reactive state. Again, I think there are very legitimate reasons for this. We've had a switch from remote to hybrid work. There's been big advancements in AI. There have been reductions in workforces. Just a few examples of things that impact HR worlds greatly. But the important thing, I think, for us to consider as we think about these three different roles is that when HR is more anticipatory, their companies are 2.1 times more likely to use assessments in hiring, succession, and development decisions, because that's what you need to do systematic forecasting. That's data you need to identify needs and gaps. But the results of that data, not just the gathering of it, are the most important part. And the results of gathering that data are higher quality leaders. Anticipators report 62% compared to 44% for reactors. The other outcome of that is high potential success rates. Anticipators lead at 69% compared to 51% for reactors. And anticipators are 3 times more likely to make better hiring decisions. They are 1.4 times more likely to respond to change effectively, something that is a very common front runner in terms of what we're focused on right now. And anticipators are 4 times more likely to have a strong leadership bench to fill critical leadership roles in the future. So as your CEO and your leaders are up at night trying to figure out how to navigate in this environment where change is outpacing our readiness, the strategic orientation of HR isn't just a nice to have. It has a measurable and significant impact on both leadership quality and the business outcomes that your organization needs to compete. And today, what April and I want to do is to help equip you to be better anticipators, to help you figure out how to leverage data and outcomes as your value proposition to support your organization successfully. Business leaders are going to have a much harder time deprioritizing these initiatives when you make a case focused on the business outcomes like these here. So what I want to do right now is to turn it over to my partner in crime, April, who has some great examples of organizations who have done just that.
Thanks so much, Jasmine. It's really a pleasure to have the chance to talk with you all today. And as Jasmine just shared, the reality of the macro environment, what some of our senior leaders are concerned with, we would really want to drive down our conversation into a deeper reality rooted in all of the things that you all as HR partners and anticipators are really dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So we want to keep our conversation really grounded in that reality and start to talk about what's really standing in the way of you showing up as an anticipator and your organizations being responsive to what you're providing them in that role as anticipator. So to get us started, we wanted to share with you some common challenges and barriers that we hear from our clients and working with them and how they have overcome some of those barriers as we move forward. So if you look on the left here, a big common challenge that we find is that my business leaders won't prioritize the need to look at talent and forecast talent in a regular way. And it's a really familiar concern, which shows a disconnect between leadership's strategic goals and the perceived value of talent and leadership initiatives. So we really want to think about how do we reframe the conversation and start to use data as that technical asset to help us move the needle in that direction. So thinking about how can we better communicate the strategic value of data to our decision makers and have them really use those data-driven approaches to lead the conversation and have that measurable business impact that we want to have. Second, in the middle, you see the common challenge or phrases that we hear from our clients, but we already have a lot of data. So yes, many organizations are sitting on mountains of data, but having data isn't the same as using it effectively. The real challenge is using data that's into actionable insights. So it's not about quantity, it's really about the quality and relevance of that data. So a few things to think about in this middle section is what barriers are preventing you from turning data into actionable insights. And what would the shift look like from data collection to really data activation? And then finally, maybe the most challenging is I'm not sure what's needed for the future. So a lot of our clients are dealing in environments, as Jasmine just talked about, that are ever changing, ever evolving, and particularly with the pace of change that organizations are faced with today, this uncertainty is really understandable. The future is evolving super rapidly, and it's hard to predict what skills, tools, or strategies are essential. And that's why adaptability and continuous learning are really crucial for organizations, and not just to build systems and cultures that can evolve with those changing needs, but really to think about how can we build flexibility into our strategies to adapt to those future demands and really start to predict what are those future capabilities that we need to develop now to be ready for that future. So you can look at all of these challenges on the page and say, wow, that's a lot to overcome. But one way we like to look at it is to think of all of these challenges or barriers as a doorway into growth, an invitation to really step into the mindset of being an anticipator. So, and we're going to dig into each of these challenges a little bit more. And I'd like to share some powerful case examples where we have seen teams and organizations not just face these challenges, but really transform them into breakthroughs. So the stories that I'll share are unique to the culture and organizational priorities that are specific to them, but together they'll spark ideas and inspire you to really lean confidently into moving into that role of anticipator. So let's look at the case for business development and how we really need to think about engaging with our leaders around not being able to prioritize the business strategy with the people strategy. And that really is a change. And some of the causes that you see here are around the disruption and change that we're finding ourselves in and really not having an executive champion. So those practical next steps are really very practical and pragmatic in the sense of thinking about the timing of your ask, really building a business pitch that resonates with leaders. But let's talk about what success looks like. And what I want to do is share with you a couple of stories in this arena where we've seen organizations and teams overcome the challenge of not getting their leaders to prioritize. The first story is from Edwards, which is a global manufacturer of power vacuums. And they had a challenge of really needing to develop rapid growth that required not just technical expertise, but really needed leaders that it could inspire and engage. In addition to that, another success story where they overcame this challenge is LyondellBasell. And they had a transformation around making a strategic transformation that isn't just about systems, but again, aligning people to that transformation. So really having the priority for both of these organizations to show that business growth and transformation are really people powered, and building the case to show that without capable leaders, that strategy was going to stall or even fail. And in the case with building that case for talent development, both of these organizations focused on what is it that we need from our leaders? What skills and capabilities do we need to build? And how do we show that connection to our strategic transformation? So we wanted to really demonstrate that building up capable leaders with the match of the skills that were necessary, that the strategy wouldn't fail. And leadership development became a strategic lever for them. And really thinking about how they use that as a framework to engage leaders. The other thing that both of these organizations did really powerfully is to have the most senior leaders in their organizations go through development themselves and be at the front end of the spear of really driving that development. And so we really see on some of what success looks like that it is getting those champions on board and being able to position the business case so that they really see this as a critical component to building out the strategy. So Jasmine, I want to check in with you to see what comments or additional words of wisdom you would have to add around this particular challenge that many organizations face.
Thanks, April. I think this is probably one of the most common ones that our customers run into. What I really loved about your story was there was a real strategy in place that started at the top. And if I put myself in our customer's shoes, what I think a lot of them will say is, I have a strategy, I just can't get buy-in for it. And I think that's inherent in that comment of my business leaders won't prioritize this. So I think your practical tip around checking the timing, aligning with business planning cycles just cannot be underestimated. I think the mind share of business leaders is sporadic. And so what I think you can really take advantage of is while they've already have in their business planning cycle where they're talking about talent, that's a prime opportunity to talk about your talent strategies that support the business objectives. And I think language is just really important here. I think that HR jargon can get in the way of the impact that HR organizations can have. So I think really speaking in the terms of KPIs, the terms of strategic initiatives that business leaders are focused on is important. And I appreciate how difficult that can be in a lot of organizations to tie activities to business outcomes. But I think if you think about stories in your organization where people have failed, where risk has been taken and results haven't been achieved, that's its own form of ROI that can be very powerful in the language of KPIs for your business leaders. So just wanted to add a few cents there.
Thank you so much. As we leave this slide, the one thing that I would add to the conversation here is particularly around measurement and having an idea of how you will show the impact of what you are recommending for the organization and show the demonstration of that. So data to build the case, but also data on the back end to show what's been accomplished through the interventions that have been put in place, the programs, the structure, the time, all of the things that you work so hard to build in your organization, showing the impact of that is critical. So I want to move us on to talk about the concept of data and how much data we have. And many organizations will say, well, we have a lot of data around our leaders and what they need and what they're doing. And what we want to talk about here is the quality of the data and really thinking about how do we use that data. This really ties into our last challenge of getting the mind share of our most senior leaders, is how do we create data and a story that really illustrates the needs that we have as an organization. So many organizations have a lot of data, whether it be 360 data, engagement scores, it's all there, but having the data isn't the same as knowing what to do with it. And so thinking about how you prepare leaders for the future, this is often where organizations can get stuck. And thinking about, this is what our leaders look like today, but how do we show the gap of where they need to go for tomorrow? And thinking about how we can really accelerate high potential leaders and not just developing them, but really preparing them for what's next. One of the most powerful ways that we see organizations do this and where we see success is when organizations really use business simulations to drive a better understanding of what is the true gap for leaders in terms of the role that they're in today and future roles that they may move into in the future. So this gives leaders a safe space to practice that decision-making, navigate complex situations, and really have that opportunity before they're in the real hot seat. And not only having the opportunity for assessment and objective data when it comes to collecting that on your leaders, but really the power of pairing that with coaching. And so this is where it really gets interesting, is when we see the power of, I have an understanding of how I am demonstrating particular leadership behaviors, but how do I glean the development that I need from that? And what we find is that in our global leadership forecasts, organizations that combine coaching and assessment are 1.8 times more likely to be in the top 10 financial performers. That's a huge difference. And so we want to think about how do we pair those experiences that really give us powerful insight. Another story that I want to highlight here is really from a recent partnership that we've had with Hormel. And they have really targeted on preparing leaders for future VP levels. And they have leveraged the Leader 3 Ready assessment on the front end of a development journey that they take these leaders on to really diagnose where are the opportunities. And it was so transformational in terms of how they use Leader 3 Ready in combination with development. This is something that we're advising to many of our clients, is how do you combine assessment, like in-depth coaching, along with development experiences to really show the power of getting to true development and really leveraging that as an opportunity to have data, objective data on our leaders so that you can really show the organization where you have gaps and why it makes sense to close those gaps through the development opportunities that you're providing for them. Another organization that used Leader 3 Ready, they did this a while back. And so the results that they saw from that is 90% of the participants that went through their program that include Leader 3 Ready were ready for the future and were rated as high performers. Hormel is still in the process of implementing their program, so we look forward to hearing those measurable results as we go forward. But this is where the power of data really comes into play. Jasmine, what else would you add?
Well, I think what I found really compelling in the last webinar was that the majority of attendees had said, we do have data. That wasn't the problem. That wasn't why assessments were failing. It was the decisions on the backside of that. So I think your example is really powerful, is assessment data doesn't stand alone. And assessment data itself is not an outcome. So going back to how we started this conversation is focusing in on the business outcomes. It's what you do with assessment. So it's what decisions are made with those assessments. So that's really what I liked about your examples, is it didn't stop with assessment. It was about what decisions can be made and what can we do based on this assessment that provided the real power of those solutions.
Absolutely. So I'll move us on to the final challenge that we often hear from clients and from many of you that we've worked with, which is, I'm just not sure what's needed for the future. So you can see on the slide here that I'm really thinking about how do I create development programs that are not just about enroll, but are preparing leaders for the future. How do I deal with leader burnout? And really that term of unconscious bossing, which is, if you haven't heard the term, unconscious bossing is really when individual contributors say to themselves, I don't want a leadership role. There's more challenge that comes to that. And so I'm going to opt out of leadership. And that's not what we want. So we really want to think about, in terms of practical next steps, is outlining how do we get to understand and predict what's needed for the next 3 to 5 years, but also be responsive in that as we move forward, and not just focus on the general leadership skills, but really narrow it down to what are the most critical skills. So to highlight this, I want to talk to you about a couple of organizations where we've seen have really addressed this challenge and prepared themselves for the future really nicely. One is GE Healthcare, which when they became an independent entity, they had a clean slate. And what they really wanted to do was think about, how do we prepare ourselves for the future, not just jump in and start offering development programs, but really pause and ask the question, what kind of leadership will really fuel our future? And they used executive interviews and cultural insights to build a leadership framework that aligned with their strategy. And you can see how that step alone really connects back to that first challenge that we talked about, where you engage your leaders in building out what is really needed for the future. In addition to GE Healthcare, another organization where we've seen take this on head on is Entergy, and really building a very powerful approach where they aligned leadership development with their path to premier strategy. And they did a lot of different things in terms of aligning their development to the critical needs. But the way they got to those critical needs was really by looking at their competency framework and aligning success profiles to really understand what is it that we need for the future. And again, senior leadership being a critical component into that as they move forward. And going back to our last challenge around data, they also use data to make decisions. So they had their leadership data, but they really activated on it and started to figure out how will they understand the gaps, and then how do they address those gaps. So when you think about these two powerful stories, what we can learn is that developing what future-ready leader looks like for your organization and using that data super wisely. The last thing I want to highlight before we leave this slide is just to celebrate the Brandon Hall Award that GE Healthcare recently received. They received the Gold Award, which is a very prestigious award, and we're really excited for them that they were able to accomplish that success for themselves and the organization. So we've highlighted for you a little bit of some of these success stories, and this is really all about the partnerships that DDI likes to have with our client organizations, and really helping you think about how do you overcome these challenges and really move into that role of anticipator and really be able to forecast talent for the future. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jasmine, and she's just going to highlight some ways that you can learn more as we move forward.
Thanks, April. You mentioned several examples of organizations who are leading the charge and ones we can continue to learn from. So I just wanted to take a moment and truly highlight these anticipators. And if you want to learn more about these stories and many others, remind you that DDI's Better Leaders Summit is November 10th through 12th in Scottsdale, Arizona, and promises to be 2.5 days of actionable insights, interactive workshops, and networking opportunities designed for strategic HR professionals, just like you, anticipating your organization's needs. So if you'd like to attend, please let your DDI contact know, and we'll make sure we secure you a spot. So as we wrap up here, we started with this importance of HR delivering on outcomes. So April and I's hope is that we've delivered on some ROI, some outcomes for you and your time today. We hope you're walking away with a roadmap, ideas, inspiration to becoming the leader your organization not only wants, but can't succeed without. Because it's hard to argue that the world is changing. And we, I think, as an HR profession, are no exception to evolve or die. As a profession in the age of analytics and AI, I think it's critical for us to move from insight to impact. It's not good enough to have an aha moment or simply justify our costs. To be real contributors in the future, we need to align, anticipate, and act. I think that's the real HR advantage. And what will come from that is the ROI from better hiring, faster development, fewer leadership failures. These things are what move HR from a cost center to a true profit driver. In the link to resources, you'll see our latest article in T&D magazine about just that. So with that, on behalf of DDI, allow me to take the opportunity to thank you all for joining us. And we hope to see you again soon, whether that's on a future webinar, on a call, or at our Leadership Summit. We are honored to do the work that we do at DDI of building better leaders alongside all of you during a time when leadership truly matters. So thank you for your time.